Hello Sensuals. A while back I had one guy challenge which I want to come back to, and it's my guy challenge number 5, the one on circumcision and ruining male orgasm. Now, the man, who's by the way a Romanian, he heard it all and he wrote back, first of all, to say thank you for addressing the subject. He gave me some explanations which I think will best be kept in that form, so they're rather intimate. But there's one portion of what he said that I want to get back to because I think it's worth it. And I think I was very superficial with one aspect, and I can't have that. So I'm getting back to it, and this is Guide Challenge number 5.2, just regarding circumcision. Now I'm going to read you the bit that he wrote on circumcision. He goes like this. Regarding circumcision, I do think that baby circumcision and female circumcision are barbaric. I am a straight guy, but I do like the appearance and behavior of a circumcised penis. By behavior, I mean that although a circumcised penis is much more limited due to the lack of foreskin and lubrication, a circumcised male will be less prone to masturbate, for example. I also noticed that you said that circumcision does not affect sexual performance. Although this is debatable from my point of view, I don't think it's worth to get into details. Well, I do think it's worth to get into details because I want to bring proper information here. So I do want to get back to circumcision because he does have a point, and there's much more to get into this subject, and I want to take a stab at it, but the right way. So, guys, get seated and get comfortable because this is one delicate subject. And ladies, if you're going to be mothers at a certain point, you ought to hear this. Number 1, what is circumcision? In the case of men, it is in modern times mostly done on infants, so newborns, and it involves cutting out surgically the foreskin, which holds the most nerve endings, and it's the most pleasurable part in actually the penis of the man. In the case of women, it is of 4 kinds. It is mostly done in Africa, first of all, and in Arabic countries. And it is done on girls, so we are not talking about infants. We are talking about teenagers or early teens. This can involve, in stage 1, removal of the hood or of the clitoris, partially or full. The second type, it implies partial or full removal of the clitoris and the internal labias. The third type, it involves partially or fully removal of the clitoris, the minor labia, and the major labia, or the outer labias, sewing together the edges with leaving just a small orifice through which the urine and the menstruation flow can pass. And the fourth kind, which is the most severe of all, if you can think of it, it implies also pricking the clitoris and doing other procedures on the labias, but also sometimes it can involve inserting some corrosive material inside the woman's vagina. Now, in some cases, it can mean also cutting all the way through the vaginal floor and removal of the skin around the groin, basically. It is done without, in either cases, both men or women. Circumcision is done without the consent of the actual individual. Either they are too small to even take this decision, so a newborn, or it is done with their opposition, basically, in the case of little girls who are going through this, well, experience, because I cannot call it procedure. The origins of circumcision are generally thought to reside in Africa and the Arabic countries, where this has been done for ages as First of all, a preparation for the wedding. So the young boy or the young girl were subjected to this practice as a proof that they could pass the test of pain. Another reason for this procedure or this experience was to ensure that the individual is clean. Now, for some reason, the folds of the vagina and the folds of the foreskin are thought not to be clean because they can be much more difficult to clean up. So in these cultures, it is a social belief or social value that they want a clean partner, and that implies that they were circumcised. Another reason for doing this was for the parents to show their loyalty to the tribe, so they would give their children subjected to this procedure as a token of their being loyal. In the Victorian times, this practice was taken out of the African and Arabic cultures and expanded into other cultures as well, as again a sign of a chaste person, a clean person, or as a procedure to prevent various diseases like paralysis, digestive disorders, epilepsy, or masturbation, clumsiness, asthma, constipation, insomnia, night terrors, incontinence. Nowadays, this kind of thinking seems not just outdated, but purely fiction. Physicians are actually aware that this is not a treatment. There's no medical grounds for this, but it is a social procedure. So nowadays, it is done out there for social reasons, in some cultures for religious reasons as well, but it doesn't cure anything. There's nothing to be cured there. In fact, this is a healthy part of our bodies that is being removed. However, physicians do promote this practice, and they promote it as a means of preventing, first of all, urinary tract infections, the risk of developing cancer or cervical cancer in the case of the partners of the man who is uncircumcised. So they're talking about potential partners that they don't even know. Maybe this person might turn out to be, I don't know, a monk, and he'll not have sexual relations, but we're going to circumcise him anyway. It is also promoted as a prevention method to reduce the chance of having penile cancer, or also to reduce the chance of transmitting HIV viruses. Now, with this, there's also a social backing of this procedure. The first ones are generally that it's cleaner or it looks better, so it's in terms of appearance. The other ones are that it reduces the importance of it. It's just a minor snip, it's not so much skin after all. Other reasons are that it prevents STDs, or another excuse is that everyone does it. So we're conforming to a social norm again. Another excuse is that they are too little to remember. So they'll never remember this pain, it'll all be gone. And the one that is the strongest, and in fact this comes from the people who are the ones taking the decision for the infant, usually it's the fathers who say that I am circumcised and I am fine. It is somehow the expectation that their baby be just like them. And with that, I'll put resources under this video. I've found also specialists, psychologists who were researching the phenomenon, and their conclusions were that men who were subjected to this procedure somehow had to face the fact that their sons might be living differently, more freely. They might get to have this experience of having an intact penis and enjoying that while they never had that choice. It is never expressed like that, but their findings was that this fear is present, and it's involved in their decision to have their sons circumcised as well. Let's get a little bit into the risks of this procedure. Now, in the case of men or little boys, because we're talking about what happens in those first few days of life, first of all, the procedure is very, very painful and it is traumatic. And some little baby boys don't even get to cry because they are in total and complete shock of the pain. It is done generally without anesthetic because the baby is just so small that he cannot take anesthetic on the spot. So it is done right there and then. Another big risk is of severe bleeding. While this may seem obvious to you, well, if we're going to cut somebody, obviously they're going to bleed. But if you take into consideration that a newborn has just 12 ounces of blood, and that's 340 grams of blood, losing even just a few ounces can put their lives at risk. Another risk is scarring or also malpractice during this procedure. So you can accidentally cut or amputate the entire penis, or it can just be somehow end up being buried in the scrotum. Those are risks. And usually in those cases or other infections that may come about in later moments, they usually require doing the procedure again on the little boy. With girls, the risks are of vaginal infections because it opens up and there's a huge surface that is exposed to bacteria and viruses. This procedure being done in poor countries where they're not all with access to, clean sources of water and hygiene and so on, they can get infected easily. Another risk in the case of girls is that they risk the chance of getting HIV because usually the razors or the scalpels or the instruments that are being used on one girl, they're usually used on more girls. Other risks are the difficulty in breastfeeding, which is crucial for little babies to be able to breastfeed in those first days of life. It is not just for physical reasons, it's also for emotional reasons. They are creating a bond with the mother, and usually that bond is also severely broken, if not shattered completely. On the long term, they can have an aggravated response to pain, and in some cases, there can be necrosis of the surface of the organ, and in the worst cases, even death. It is extremely painful, extremely complicated, and especially with little babies who are so fragile, they can also die of this procedure. Now, the link below can also show an indicator of that, and it offers a much more detailed explanation. The effects on the long run are actually related also to their sexual life, because it does have effects, and even the guy whose response I'm also giving here is touching on that. So he's talking about a drier penis and lack of sensitivity in the penis, and those are effects. And in fact, the most erogenous part of the penis is actually the foreskin, and once you cut that out, a lot of the men who had been subjected to this procedure much later in life, they said that their sexual life changed from experiencing it in color into experiencing it in black and white. So it's a severe reduction of the pleasure patterns that you can have and the pleasure that you can experience through your body. And yes, that will affect the quality of your sex life. Other possible effects for men are the fact that because the penis is not, or the glans, the head of the penis, is not protected by the foreskin, the nerve endings sort of retract, so it hardens, and sensations are not felt as intensely. That's why sex can be not so pleasurable for them. and they can really need, I don't know, heavy stroking in order to feel pleasure. And this can have obviously an effect not just on the man, but also on his partner. Whether she can take that kind of sexual intercourse or not, that is up to them. Also, with the dryness of the penis, there are effects also on his partner. Now, a dry penis will obviously dry out the vagina of the woman. Usually the covering, so the foreskin, was also contributing to keeping the penis moist and soft. And without that, the head absorbs much more of the fluids, and if the woman cannot keep, so if her body cannot keep up with that rate, she can experience a very painful sexual intercourse just for the fact that it's dry and painful to have inside of just a dry thing going up and down inside of your body. Another thing that can happen in the case of girls now, after they've been subjected to circumcision, obviously their sex life is going to be painful, so they can experience pain during sex, and they can also experience pain during menstruation, so during their period times. Obviously, childbirth, if they ever get pregnant, is difficult to say the least, and a lot of these girls need, at least if they've suffered type 3 circumcision, they need to be unstitched so that they can have a normal sexual life and a normal birth. In terms of psychological effects, both men and women who have been subjected to this procedure or this mutilation, because we're going to call it out for what it is, they feel frustrated, depressed, fearful of what happens, especially in the case of girls who are living in African or Arabic countries. This is also a sign of their being chaste or loyal, and if they were ever to have another procedure done on them, so unstitching them, they would be fearful to be believed to betray their husband or stray away or go with other men, and that's what adds to the fear of this area of their body. In some cases, trauma, especially if the procedure is done on little baby boys or little infants. The shock that they're going through, it can affect the way their brain is wired for the rest of their lives, and they can carry this without even realizing it. There are studies for this. Again, the link below will take you to a lot of resources for you to read more about this and document more on this one. And ultimately, it is a feeling and a wound of betrayal on behalf of their caretakers, because they subjected their own bodies when they could have not decided for themselves to a procedure that was so cruel and done without their permission. You ought to leave something like this for an adult to decide if it was ever up for decision. Now, on behalf of the parents, it is usually, first of all, the effects when they get their baby back in hospitals. That's when they realize what they were subjected to. And the mothers who were present during the procedure, there's a video with testimonials also from women. They say that they'll hear their cries, the baby's cries, for the rest of their lives, because they were never aware, and the medicals, the physicians never presented them the risks and what this procedure entails. As with a lot of the things that I'm doing, my purpose here is to bring about information and education. Now, besides the physical and psychological aspects of this, there are also ethical discussions about these procedures in both cases, men and women. This procedure is backed up by medical doctors, is extremely in North America, in the United States especially. There are countries who are backing out from this procedure. That's Canada, that's Australia. There are countries who are looking up if this thing is even legal, and that's the Scandinavian Peninsula, Germany as well. And there are countries where this is done extremely rare, And we're talking about the majority of Europe, Russia included in this discussion, and also a lot of the countries in Eastern Asia. However, the procedure is still being done in Africa and in the Arabic countries, and it's backed up again by religious beliefs. There's also a distinction. The majority of people on the planet look at female circumcision as barbaric and straight down mutilation, but the majority of people, at least in the Western part of the world, are promoting male circumcision as a means of prevention, or it's also looked upon as a social procedure or in a social surgery. That goes to show that we're looking at this from a gender perspective. So if we do it on girls, it's barbaric and it's primitive and it's mutilation. If we do it on boys, it's acceptable. But the effects can be negative in both cases. The psychological effects, the effects on their intimate life, and the fact that they do not get to decide, that's all there in both cases. Now, that being said, I also want to get into the ethical discussion. And the first one is actually what I said even at the beginning. This procedure is being done without the actual individual's consent. That is considered to break human rights. And with that in mind, we ought to question whether it's ethical to do this procedure without the consent of the person itself. The second thing is that this procedure, although it has no medical background, so this is not being done as a treatment, it's promoted as a procedure, and it is still done in hospitals on a healthy organ. The other part of ethics is that many cultures today are still promoting this practice as with religious or with social backing, and it is considered acceptable, although the people themselves don't necessarily give consent. They're not asked if they want this or not. And they don't get to choose. In the case of baby boys, there is also a pathologizing of the organ itself. So in the medical texts, the foreskin is usually missing. There's no proper education as to its functions. It is only presented as a means, something to be removed, and there are many details given as to the procedure itself. And there's also a misdiagnosis of phimosis, which is the skin, the foreskin that sticks to the gland. Usually that happens when the baby boy is born. That foreskin is actually stuck, it is attached to the gland, and the education that many people get is to retract brutally and wash the glands instead of letting that foreskin to retract by itself naturally, because it gradually does that. And not only is it painful for the little baby boys, but it also exposes them to a lot of complications just by retracting something that should not be retracted in the first few days of life. Another ethical aspect to this is the fact that in the majority of countries, female circumcision is already regarded as mutilation, and at a global level it is fought against by organizations like UNICEF, World Health Organization, the United Nations. But not the same can be said about the male circumcision. And last but not least, in this procedure, there's also a commercial use of the foreskin. So we're taking out the foreskin of baby boys and we're giving it to commercial use, either for skin grafts or for creams that can be sold at a very, very expensive price. And this is actually arguable. You're retracting the skin for health reasons, but then you're using it and you're selling it commercially as a hospital, and you're making good money out of it in order to make even more good money out of it by selling it to people who can afford to pay for this. creams against skin grafts, and so on. Some of the skin grafts go also to help people who have suffered from burns and they need this help to recover. That's, let's say, a good use of the foreskin, but it is still an ethical discussion here whether this is to be done without the permission of the person, and then you're making money out of it also. So this is it in a nutshell. In case this was a painful vlog, and it's obviously not my usual pleasurable vlog that I did, I am sorry about this. However, I do believe that if we want to get educated sexually, we ought to be properly informed. And with this vlog, I obviously need to present my excuses for answering in such a superficial way last time. But even so, if you go back to that vlog, you will see that at a certain point, the man asked, is it normal for wife to ask for husband to get circumcised? Well, if you ask me, after presenting you with all of these reasons, it is not normal for anyone to request this of their partners. If somebody wants to do this on their own, so it's their decision, you have the right to decide for your own body and the experiences that you want to have. And if you think this helps you in some way, in spite of everything that you've just heard, and I do hope you will click on the resources as well, because this is not a joke. Okay, it is your call and nobody can stop you from doing something that you want as long as it's not hurting anybody else around you. But otherwise, I think circumcision, because it's still so widespread, we need to address it. And whether you're a man or a woman who watched all the way to the end, and if you ever get to be a parent and you ever get to come to the situation where a doctor asks you, do you want your baby boy or baby girl circumcised or not, then at least you have some information about it. So that being said, this ends my Guide Challenge 5.2, and I want to assure you that from now on I'll be taking much more seriously everything that is being asked there, and even if this means making my vlogs longer. So I don't care about that. I'm all up for quality. So until next time, I hope that you have a pleasurable and very informed and very educated sexual life.